You're standing in the kitchen of a 130-year-old lighthouse on the shore of Lake Michigan, and you smell it before you understand it. Cigar smoke. Thick, warm, curling past your face like someone just lit up 2 feet away. You turn around. There's no one there. No ashtray, no embers, no open flame anywhere in the building. Smoking hasn't been allowed inside these walls in over a century, and yet the smell is unmistakable. This is a true story. Silshwa Point sits on the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, on the Lake Michigan side, in a small township called Gulliver. Locals pronounce it Sis-Shwa, which trips up almost everyone who tries to read it cold, because the name isn't English. French fur traders and sailors named this stretch of coastline, back when they were the ones navigating it. And what they picked wasn't poetic. It was practical. Silshwa means only choice. For miles along this part of the lake, in a storm, this point was the only harbor a ship had any real hope of reaching. The lighthouse itself was first lit in 1892, a 77-foot brick tower with a third-order Fresnel lens, built to throw its beam 16 nautical miles out across open water. It's still standing today, still listed on the National Register of Historic Places, and still attached to the same 2-story keeper's residence it was built with, the house where the men who ran the light actually lived, ate, slept, and in at least one case, died. For decades, that house had a keeper in it every single night, no exceptions. The light couldn't go dark, storm or no storm, because ships were still out there depending on it. It was a job built entirely around not having a choice. You kept the light burning, or people drowned. Which makes it fitting, in a dark sort of way, that the man most associated with this lighthouse today never really got a choice about leaving it either. That man's name was Joseph Willie Townsend. He was appointed head keeper of Silshwa Point in 1902, and by every account that survives, he took the job seriously. Keepers in that era didn't just flip a switch at dusk. The lens had to be wound, trimmed, and watched by hand, sometimes several times through a single night, on top of logging every ship that passed and maintaining the fog signal that warned sailors when the light itself couldn't be seen. It was not an easy post. Gulliver was, and still is, remote, and Upper Peninsula winters are long, dark, and isolating. A keeper's family could go months seeing almost no one outside their own household. What survives about Townsend as a person is thinner than what survives about Townsend as a legend. But one detail comes up in nearly every account of him. He loved cigars. Not casually, heavily, constantly. The kind of habit that follows a man through an entire career. His wife, Ruth, wasn't having it. Inside their home, in the keeper's quarters attached to the tower, she wouldn't allow it. If Joseph Townsend wanted to smoke, he had to step outside, into the wind, the cold, the lake air, no matter the hour, no matter the season. It's a small detail. It's also, as it turns out, the detail that outlived him. By 1910, Townsend's health was failing. The record doesn't give a clean, certain cause of death. There's no surviving diagnosis anyone can point to with confidence. What's known is that he'd smoked heavily for years, and that whatever was wrong with him was serious enough to end his duties and eventually confine him to an upstairs bedroom in the keeper's house. Most people who've looked into his story assume it was his lungs. It's a reasonable guess. It isn't a documented fact. There was no hospital to take him to. Gulliver in 1910 was a small maritime outpost, hours from any real medical care, even in good weather. And Michigan winters do not offer good weather. So Joseph Townsend stayed where he'd spent almost a decade keeping watch, in the house attached to the tower, in the room upstairs. And that's where he died. That room still exists. Visitors can walk into it today. The historical society that runs the lighthouse now still calls it, without much ceremony, the captain's room. Here's where the story stops being just sad and starts being unsettling. Townsend died in the dead of a Michigan winter. Frozen ground and Lake Michigan ice meant there was no quick way to bury him, and no easy way for his family to reach this isolated point to say goodbye. So the people caring for the lighthouse did what remote communities often did in that era, when death arrived in January instead of June. They embalmed him on site, using the standard method of the day, in the stone-walled basement beneath the house, over the same heavy stone sinks the keepers used for ordinary chores. Then they carried him back upstairs and laid him out in the front parlor, dressed and prepared, to wait. He reportedly stayed there. Inside the house he'd kept watch from for 8 years, long enough for word to travel. Long enough for relatives to make the difficult winter journey out to a stretch of coastline that was, appropriately enough, named for having no other option. Only once enough people had arrived to say a proper goodbye was his body finally carried back down through that same cold basement, out to a waiting coffin and a wagon, for burial. Whatever you believe about what happened after, that part isn't legend. It's simply what winter does to a place with one road in and one way out. Townsend was buried. The light kept turning, and new keepers rotated through the station in the years that followed, the way keepers always had. But according to those who lived and worked there afterward, something about the house had changed. It started, most accounts agree, with the smell. Cigar smoke, specifically cigar smoke, not cigarette, not pipe, drifting through rooms where no one had been smoking, in a building where smoking indoors was against the rules. It would appear suddenly, strong enough that people assumed someone else must be in the house, then vanish just as suddenly, with no trace, no lingering ash, no one ever actually caught in the act. The smell wasn't the only thing. Over the decades, staff and visitors have described a rotating cast of small, specific disturbances, almost all of them centered on the room where Townsend died and the rooms just below it. A large round mirror in that upstairs bedroom has, by some counts, shown Townsend's face more than a dozen separate times to people passing by it. Enough that some who work at the lighthouse now half joke that the mirror is less a mirror than a doorway. Silverware and place settings have reportedly turned up rearranged overnight, as if someone had walked through and corrected them. A rocking chair has been seen moving with no one in it. Footsteps have been heard climbing the tower stairs when the tower is locked and empty. Some mornings, staff have found a strange crescent-shaped impression pressed into the bedspread in Townsend's old room, exactly the shape you'd expect if someone had just sat down on the edge of the bed and gotten back up. And more than once, on separate occasions years apart, people with no connection to each other have reported the same specific thing. A man standing at an upstairs window, watching. Once it was a pair of tour guides. Another time, a local man painting a garage nearby looked up and saw the same kind of figure in a different window entirely. The dining room, one floor down, at a time when the building was supposed to be empty. For a while, the lighthouse itself was almost lost. The Coast Guard automated the light in the early 1970s, replaced the keeper's presence with a machine, and by 1973 had walked away from the station completely. The house sat empty and decaying for over a decade. Then, in 1987, a small group of local residents formed the Gulliver Historical Society and took on the job of saving it. And according to the woman who led that effort, restoring the house didn't just uncover its history. It seemed to wake something up. During the restoration, volunteers found an old kitchen table said to have belonged to Townsend himself, broken apart into 4 pieces, scattered in 4 separate corners of the basement. They pieced it back together and moved it into the kitchen, roughly where it would have originally stood. By the Society president's own later account, published in a Lighthouse history magazine, that was around when things started happening in earnest. as though putting one piece of the captain's old life back together had gotten his attention. Not long after, she described walking up to the house on a still, windless day and watching what she thought was a stray pencil roll toward her down the porch steps, one at a time, in a perfectly straight line. It wasn't a pencil, it was a cigar. Other incidents piled up in the years that followed, from multiple, unconnected witnesses. A state trooper, called out to check a triggered alarm, searched the building top to bottom, found no one inside, and still reported hearing voices coming from the kitchen. An old family Bible on display in the dining room, donated by Townsend's own descendants, reportedly slammed shut on its own with enough force to startle the volunteers cleaning nearby, none of whom were anywhere close to it. Visitors and tour guides, on more than one occasion, described faces and shapes appearing in that same upstairs mirror. Not just Townsend's, but others too, including, by one account, a woman in a wedding dress that no one has ever been able to identify. A journalist who spent time at the Lighthouse in the early 2000s later wrote about experiencing some of it firsthand. Sudden waves of cigar smoke rolling through an empty kitchen and vanishing just as fast, a pocket of freezing air with no obvious source, and an exterior lamp that had mysteriously stopped working earlier that night, which flickered on command twice when she and her guide asked aloud whether the captain was there. So is it Joseph Townsend? That's the story everyone tells, and it's easy to see why. The cigar smoke alone ties it back to him almost too neatly. But the people who take this seriously enough to actually investigate it aren't so sure it's that simple. One Michigan-based researcher who has looked into several hundred reportedly haunted sites across the state and co-authored a series of books on the subject, has spent real time at Sulshwa Point, specifically trying to identify who or what is actually there. Her conclusion complicates the tidy version of the story. She's pointed to a different death connected to the Lighthouse, a woman named Mary Pemble, mother-in-law of a later keeper, who reportedly died of cancer inside the house in February of 1919 after a severe winter storm, and who, like Townsend 9 years before her, couldn't be buried right away because the ground was frozen solid. By her assessment, at least some of what people experience at Sulshwa Point may not be the captain at all. Then there are the reports that don't fit either of them. A giggling child's voice some visitors call Dorothy, that unidentified woman in the wedding dress, faces in the mirror that don't match any known photograph, which raises an uncomfortable possibility for anyone hoping for a clean explanation. Sulshwa Point might not have one ghost story. It might have several, tangled together by more than a century of people telling and retelling them, until they all sound like they belong to the same man with the cigar. There's a more grounded theory too, one that doesn't require anyone to have stayed behind at all. Old wooden buildings hold on to smell. Tobacco smoke in particular soaks into wood grain, plaster, and fabric over years of heavy use, and can be released again later by nothing stranger than a shift in humidity, a change in temperature, or air moving through a house that's been sealed up and reopened. A building that housed a heavy cigar smoker for 8 straight years, in an era before modern ventilation, is exactly the kind of place where that would happen. Decades later, with no cigar and no captain anywhere in sight. Neither theory fully explains everything people have reported. That's usually how these stories survive. Sulshwa Point Light is still standing. It's run today as a museum by the same historical society that pieced that table back together in 1987, open to visitors who can walk through the same rooms, climb the same tower, and stand in the same upstairs bedroom where Joseph Townsend died. It's regularly named one of the most haunted lighthouses on the entire Great Lakes, and the Historical Society doesn't shy away from that reputation. They lean into it. running their own haunted lighthouse events every fall, inviting people in specifically to see if they'll notice anything. Staff say they still do. Visitors say they still do. The smell still comes and goes, unpredictable and unexplained, more than 115 years after the man it's supposedly attached to was carried out through that basement for the last time. Maybe that's fitting in the end. This point was named for having no other option, for being the one place a desperate ship could turn when there was nowhere else left to go. Joseph Townsend spent 8 years making sure that promise held, keeping a light burning for other people every single night, whether he wanted to or not. If even a fraction of what's been reported at Sulshwa Point is real, then somewhere in all of this, he finally got one choice for himself: where and when to light up. If a story like this is the kind of thing that keeps you looking over your shoulder, subscribe. There are more true ones exactly like it coming. And if you've ever smelled something that shouldn't have been there, tell us about it in the comments. We read everyone,